Jake Martinez walked through the huge metal doors of the Zenthera Combat Academy. The building was massive, made of dark stone that seemed to eat light. Strange symbols glowed along the walls in colors he had never seen before. His boots made soft sounds on the smooth floor as he looked around. The place was nothing like the military bases back on Earth. Everything here was built for beings much larger than humans. The ceiling stretched so high that Jake had to tilt his head back to see it. Wide hallways could fit 3 Earth trucks side by side. Even the door handles were placed too high for him to reach easily. Other students moved through the halls around him. Jake tried not to stare, but it was hard. A group of tall, thin beings with blue skin and 4 arms glided past him. Their movements were smooth like water. Behind them came something that looked like a walking tree, its bark-like skin creaking with each step. Green eyes glowed from deep holes in what Jake guessed was its face. A loud crash echoed from somewhere nearby. Jake turned to see 2 huge creatures wrestling in a practice area. They had thick gray skin and arms like tree trunks. One picked up the other and threw it across the room. The thrown creature hit the wall with a bang that shook the floor. It got up, shook its head, and laughed a deep, rumbling laugh. Jake pulled his bag higher on his shoulder and kept walking. He was looking for room 247, where his first class would start soon. The academy had given all students a map, but it was written in Galactic Standard. Jake could read some of it, but not enough to feel sure he was going the right way. Lost. Human? A voice asked behind him. Jake turned around. A creature that looked like a giant insect stood there. It had 6 legs, 2 arms, and a head that moved in quick, jerky motions. Its eyes were black and huge, taking up most of its face. The voice came from somewhere in its throat, making clicking sounds between words. "I'm looking for room 247, Jake said. "Combat theory class with Instructor Vexthul." The insect creature made a sound that might have been laughing. "Kenthara is also going to that class. Kenthara will show the soft-skinned human the way. Try not to fall behind. Human legs are very short." Jake followed Kenthara through the halls. Other students they passed looked at Jake with what seemed like curiosity mixed with something else. Some pointed at him and made sounds to their friends. A few just stared. "Why do they all look at me like that?" Jake asked. Kenthara's head turned to look at him while still walking forward. "Humans are new here. Most beings have never seen one before. They wonder why such a weak species was allowed into the academy." Jake felt his jaw tighten, but he said nothing. This was not the first time someone had called humans weak since he arrived at the academy 3 days ago. They reached a large room, filled with seats that faced down toward a practice area. The seats were different sizes to fit different types of beings. Jake found one that seemed about right for him and sat down. Kenthara took a seat nearby, folding his 6 legs under him, in a way that looked impossible. More students came into the room. Jake saw beings he had never imagined could exist. Some looked like they were made of living rock. Others had skin that changed colors as he watched. A group of creatures that looked like flying snakes floated through the air instead of walking. "There is the other human," Kenthara said, pointing with one of his arms. Jake looked and saw Zara Quinn walking into the room. She was the only other human at the academy. Jake had met her on his first day, and they had quickly become friends. It was good to have someone from home to talk to. Zara saw Jake and walked over to sit next to him. "How are you doing?" she asked, quietly. "Fine," Jake said. "Just getting used to being the smallest thing in every room." Zara smiled. "I know what you mean. In my xenobiology class yesterday, the professor had to bring a special chair just so I could reach the lab table." A deep voice boomed across the room, cutting off their conversation. "Students will take seats and be quiet." The being who spoke was massive, even by the standards of this place. It looked like a cross between a crocodile and a dragon, standing on 2 thick legs. Its skin was dark green and covered in scales that caught the light. Yellow eyes swept across the room, and when they looked at Jake, he felt like the creature was measuring him for dinner. "I am Instructor Vexthul," the being said. Its voice was deep and rough, like rocks grinding together. "For the next semester, I will teach you the art of close combat. Some of you may survive this class. Others will learn their limits in ways they do not enjoy." Several students shifted in their seats. Jake noticed that even the large, tough-looking ones seemed nervous. Combat is not about fancy moves or pretty techniques, Vexthul continued. It is about who lives and who dies. It is about understanding your body, your mind, and your enemy. Most important, it is about understanding your place in the universe, the Ahar. Instructor's eyes found Jake and Zara. Some species are born warriors. They have claws, fangs, thick skin, or great strength. Others— He paused, staring directly at the two humans. Others must learn to accept their weaknesses and find other ways to be useful. Jake felt heat rise in his face. Next to him, Zara sat very still, but he could see her hands make fists. Today we begin with basic theory, Vexthul said, turning away from them. You will learn about the great warrior traditions of the galaxy, the blade dancing of the elven worlds, the stone-breaking power of the giants, the speed-killing of the mantis clans. The instructor moved to a wall covered with weapons. Jake had never seen most of them before. Some looked like swords, but with too many blades. Others seemed to be designed for creatures with more than 2 arms. Each species has developed combat styles that use their natural gifts, Vexthul explained, picking up a long, curved blade. The Elvish use their grace and speed. Giants use their strength. Mantis warriors use their natural weapons. He set the blade down and picked up what looked like a club covered in spikes. But some species never developed true warrior traditions. They became dependent on tools and machines instead of their own bodies. They are weak. Again, his yellow eyes found Jake and Zara. This time there was no mistake about what he meant. The class continued with Vexthul showing different weapons and explaining their uses. Jake tried to pay attention, but he kept thinking about the instructor's words. He thought about his time in Earth's military, about the training he had received, about the things he had seen and done. When the class ended, students began filing out. Jake and Zara gathered their things slowly. Don't let him get to you, Zara said quietly. Jake shouldered his bag. I'm not, he said. But they both knew that was not entirely true. As they walked toward the door, Kenthara appeared beside them. Kenthara wonders, the insect said, why humans even came to this place. There are many academies that teach computer skills and machine repair. Those would be better for your kind. Jake stopped walking. He turned to look at Kenthara. We're here to learn just like everyone else. Kenthara made his clicking laugh sound again. But what can soft-skinned humans learn about fighting? You have no claws, no fangs, no armor. You are slow and weak. Even your young are helpless for many years. Other students had stopped to listen. Jake could feel their eyes on him. Maybe, Jake said quietly. You'll find out. He walked away, leaving Kenthara and the others behind. Zara caught up with him in the hall. That was interesting, she said. Jake did not answer. He was thinking about something his old drill sergeant used to say back on Earth. It's not about how big you are. It's about how big you fight. Maybe it was time to show them how big humans could fight. 3 days later, Jake sat in the same classroom, but this time things were different. Instructor Vexthul had moved all the seats back to create a large open space in the middle of the room. Weapons hung on racks around the edges of the space. The air felt thick with excitement and nervousness. Today we move from theory to practice, Vexthul announced. His yellow eyes swept over the students. You will see real combat techniques. You will learn what separates true warriors from those who only pretend to be strong. Jake noticed that more students than usual had come to class. Word must have spread that today would be different. Even some instructors from other classes stood along the walls to watch. Vexthul walked to the weapon racks. First, I will show you the blade work of the elven synthesis worlds. He picked up a sword that seemed to be made of silver light. When he moved it, the blade left trails of soft blue glow in the air. The instructor began to dance. There was no other word for it. He moved like water, spinning and turning, while the blade sang through the air around him. The sword became part of his body, moving so fast that Jake could barely follow it. Each movement flowed into the next without stopping. Students watched in amazement. Even the tough-looking rock creatures seemed impressed. When Vexthal finished, he was not even breathing hard. Elven combat is about becoming one with your weapon, he explained. Speed, grace, and perfect balance. It takes centuries to master. He put the glowing sword away and picked up what looked like a hammer made for giants. The handle was as long as Jake was tall, and the head looked like it weighed more than a small car. Now the combat style of the stone giants, Vexthal said. This time his movements were completely different. No dancing or flowing motions. Instead, he stood like a mountain and struck like lightning. Each swing of the massive hammer would have crushed a normal person. The weapon moved through the air with terrible speed, making sounds like thunder. He brought the hammer down on a practice target. The target, which Jake knew was made of the same super-strong material as the walls, cracked down the middle. Pieces fell to the floor with loud crashes. Giant combat is about raw power, Vexthal explained. One perfect strike to end any fight. It requires great strength and perfect timing. Jake had to admit he was impressed. The instructor might be arrogant, but he was clearly skilled. Vexthal put away the giant hammer and picked up two curved knives that gleamed like mirrors. Finally, the speed-killing techniques of the Mantis clans. Now his movements became a blur. The knives seemed to be everywhere at once, striking targets too fast for Jake to count. In seconds, a dozen practice dummies had been cut to pieces. The instructor moved like a machine built for killing, precise and deadly. When he stopped, not a single piece of the practice dummies was larger than Jake's hand. Mantis warriors strike faster than the eye can follow, Vexthal said. They end fights before their enemies know they have begun. The students sat in stunned silence. Jake had to admit that what he had just seen was amazing. These were fighting styles that humans could never copy. They did not have the right bodies for it. These are the combat traditions of the great warrior races, Vexthal continued. Each one developed over thousands of years, each one using the natural gifts of their species. He put the knives away and turned to face the class. His eyes found Jake and Zara. But not every species developed such traditions, he said. Some races never learned to fight with honor. They became dependent on machines and tricks. They forgot what it means to be a true warrior. Jake felt his hands make fists. Around the room he could see other students looking at him and Zara with expressions that ranged from pity to amusement. Take humans, for example, Vexthal continued. They have no natural weapons. No claws, no fangs, no thick skin for protection. They are slow compared to most species. They are weak. Their bones break easily. Kenthara made his clicking laugh. Kenthara has heard that human young cannot even walk for almost a full year after birth. Most species are ready to hunt within days. Other students joined in with their own comments. I heard they can't even see in the dark, said one of the rock creatures. How do they hunt? Their teeth are flat and small, added a snake-like being. They must have been prey animals on their world. Jake felt heat rising in his face, but he forced himself to stay calm. Next to him, Zara was sitting very still, but he could see she was angry too. Vexthal raised a hand for silence. Yes, humans are clearly not built for combat. They have survived only by using tools and hiding behind machines. They have no warrior traditions because they have no warrior spirit. Jake had heard enough. He started to stand up, but Zara put a hand on his arm. Don't, she whispered. He's trying to make you angry. Don't give him what he wants. Jake sat back down, but his jaw was tight. However, Vexthal continued, we are all here to learn. So perhaps our human students can show us their species' approach to combat. It will be educational. The instructor walked to a rack and pulled out a long wooden staff. Jake recognized it as being made from Zenthari ironwood. He had read about it in his academy materials. The wood was supposed to be nearly unbreakable, stronger than steel, but much lighter. Human, Vexthal said, pointing at Jake. Come forward. Jake felt every eye in the room turn to him. The instructor was clearly planning to embarrass him in front of everyone. Part of him wanted to refuse, to just walk out of the room. But another part, the part that had gotten him through military training back on Earth, made him stand up. He walked down to the practice area. Up close, Instructor Vexthul was even more impressive. The top of Jake's head barely reached the instructor's chest. The creature's scales looked like armor and its claws were longer than Jake's fingers. "Take this," Vexthul said, holding out the staff. Jake took the weapon. It was about 6 feet long and perfectly balanced. The wood was smooth and warm. To the touch, he could feel how strong it was just by holding it. "Now," Vexthul said, turning to address the class, "observe the human's technique. Notice how inadequate it appears compared to true warrior traditions." Jake stood there holding the staff, feeling foolish. The instructor was clearly setting him up to fail. Everyone in the room was watching him, waiting for him to embarrass himself and his entire species. "Well," Vexthul said, "show us this famous human fighting spirit we have heard so much about." Jake looked at the staff in his hands. Then he looked at the instructor's confident smile. Finally, he looked around at all the students who were watching. Him like he was some kind of amusing show. Something his old drill sergeant used to say came back to him. When someone expects you to fail, that's when you show them what you're really made of. Jake shifted his grip on the staff. But instead of taking a fighting stance, he did something unexpected. He started to examine the weapon more closely, running his hands along its length, testing its weight and balance. "What are you doing?" Vexthul asked, sounding confused. Jake didn't answer right away. He was thinking like an engineer, not a warrior. He was looking at the grain of the wood, the way it was carved, the stress points where it might be weak. "I'm learning," Jake said finally. "Learning what?" the instructor demanded. Jake looked up at him and smiled. It was not a friendly smile. "I'm learning that you don't understand humans at all." Jake continued to study the staff while everyone watched him. He could feel their eyes on him, waiting for him to do something foolish. Instructor Vexthul stood with his arms crossed, clearly expecting Jake to fail in some embarrassing way. "The human seems confused," Canthera said from his seat. "Perhaps it does not know what a weapon is for." Other students made sounds of agreement or amusement. Jake ignored them all. In his mind, he was back in engineering school, learning about stress and pressure, about how different materials behaved under force. The Zenthari ironwood staff was beautiful, he had to admit. The grain ran straight and clean along its length. It had been carved by experts who knew their craft. The wood was incredibly strong, stronger than any earth wood he knew. But it was still wood. Jake found what he was looking for about halfway, down the staff's length. There the grain changed direction slightly. It was barely visible, but to his trained eye it was clear. This was where the tree had grown around a branch years ago. The wood was still strong there, but not as strong as the rest. "Any time now, human," Vexthul said impatiently. "Show us your species' combat skills." Jake looked up at the instructor. "You're right about one thing," he said calmly. "Humans don't have claws or fangs or thick armor." "Finally, some honesty," the instructor said with satisfaction. "But you're wrong about something else," Jake continued. "You think that makes us weak." Jake placed one end of the staff on the floor and held it steady with his foot. Then he gripped it with both hands about 2 feet up from where he was standing. "Humans don't see weapons the same way you do," Jake said. "When you look at this staff, you see a weapon that someone made for fighting." He shifted his grip slightly, positioning his hands exactly where he wanted them. "When I look at it, I see raw materials." Without any warning, Jake pulled down hard and fast. There was a loud crack that echoed through the room like a gunshot. The staff broke cleanly in half at exactly the point where Jake had spotted the weak grain. The room went completely silent. Jake now held 2 pieces of wood instead of one long staff. Each piece was about 3 feet long, much better for close fighting. He examined the broken ends. The wood had splintered, creating rough, dangerous points. "What? How did you?" Vexthul stammered. Jake looked at the broken staff in his hands, then at the shocked instructor. "Zenthari ironwood is incredibly strong," he said in a calm voice, "but even the strongest materials have weak points if you know how to find them." He held up the 2 pieces. "These are better weapons than what you gave me. Shorter means more control. 2 pieces means I can block and attack at the same time. And these splintered ends, He showed them the sharp, jagged wood at the breakpoints. Much more dangerous than smooth wood. Some students were starting to whisper to each other. Jake heard words like impossible and how did he know in several different languages. The staff was unbreakable, Vexthul said, his voice uncertain for the first time since Jake had known him. Nothing is unbreakable, Jake replied. You just have to understand how it's made and where the stress points are. Jake took one of the broken pieces and showed it to the class. See this grain pattern here? The wood grew around a branch, creating a weak point. The rest of the staff is incredibly strong, but right here, he pointed to where the break had happened. Right here it was just waiting for someone to apply force in the right way. Zara was staring at him with amazement. She knew Jake had been an engineer in the military, but she had never seen him do anything like this, but that was supposed to be a demonstration of human weakness, Vexthul said. He sounded confused, and maybe a little angry. Jake nodded. It was. And you're right. I am weaker than you. I'm slower than most beings here. I don't have claws or thick skin or any natural weapons. He held up the two pieces of broken staff again. But what you don't understand is that humans learn to make up for all of that. We learn to think differently. We learn to see tools and weapons everywhere. Jake walked over to a practice dummy that stood nearby. With quick, efficient movements, he demonstrated how the two shorter pieces could be used. He showed blocking techniques, striking angles, and how the splintered ends could be used for maximum damage. One long staff limits your options, he explained, as he moved. But two shorter pieces give you flexibility. You can fight two opponents at once. You can block with one hand and attack with the other. You can throw one and still have a weapon. The students watched in fascination. Even Canthara had stopped making his clicking sounds and was paying close attention. Every human child learns this, Jake continued. We learn to look at everything around us and ask, how can this help me? How can I use this? What can I make? With this? He stopped moving and faced the instructor. You said humans have no warrior traditions. You're wrong. Our entire species is built around one warrior tradition. Never give up and never stop adapting. Vexthul was quiet for a long moment. Around the room, Jake could hear students whispering in languages he didn't recognize. The mood had changed, completely from what it was when class started. You destroyed Academy property, the instructor said finally. Jake looked down at the broken staff pieces in his hands. Yes, I did. And I made it into something more useful. That staff was carved by master craftsmen on Zenthera Prime. It was hundreds of years old. And now it's two weapons instead of one decorative piece, Jake replied. I'd say that's an improvement. One of the rock creatures raised a massive hand. How did you know where to break it? Jake turned to face the student. I studied engineering before I came here. You learn to understand how materials behave under stress. Wood, metal, stone, they all have patterns. If you know how to read those patterns, you can find the weak spots. Another student, one of the snake-like beings, spoke up. But that requires much learning. How do all humans know this? We don't all know engineering, Jake admitted. But we all learn to adapt. A human farmer learns to fix broken tools with whatever materials are available. A human child learns to make toys from sticks and stones. A human soldier learns to turn anything into a weapon. He held up the broken staff pieces again. This is what humans do. We take the world around us and we change it to fit our needs. We don't just use tools, we make tools. We don't just follow old traditions, we create new ones. Vexthul was staring at Jake with an expression that was hard to read. The instructor's yellow eyes seemed to be seeing Jake differently than before. This changes nothing, Vexthul said after a long pause. You broke one practice weapon through trickery. That does not make you a warrior. Jake smiled. It was the same smile he had given before breaking the staff, not entirely friendly. Would you like me to demonstrate on something else? He asked. Cow. Room went very quiet again. Jake could see some students looking at each other nervously. Even the instructors who had come to watch seemed suddenly interested. Vexthul's scales seemed to darken slightly. What do you mean? Jake looked around the room at all the weapons hanging on the walls. Then he looked at the practice equipment. Finally, his eyes settled back on the instructor. "I mean," Jake said quietly, "that I can find the weak point in anything, even things that seem completely unbreakable." The challenge hung in the air between them like smoke. The silence in the room stretched on. Jake could hear his own heartbeat. He had just challenged one of the Academy's most feared instructors, and everyone knew it. Instructor Vexthul's yellow eyes studied Jake carefully. The massive reptilian warrior was clearly trying to decide if Jake was being brave or just stupid. "You think you can find weak points in anything?" Vexthul asked slowly. "I know I can," Jake replied. His voice was steady, but inside he was wondering if he had gone too far. Vexthul walked to the weapon rack and picked up a sword that looked like it was made of black metal. This blade was forged in the fire mountains of Krell Prime. It has cut through starship armor. Find the weak point in this. Jake set down his broken staff pieces and took the sword. It was heavier than he expected, but perfectly balanced. The metal was unlike anything he had seen before. It seemed to absorb light instead of reflecting it. He ran his fingers along the blade, feeling for imperfections. The metal was smooth and flawless. He checked the edge, sharp enough to cut paper just by touching it. The handle was wrapped in some kind of leather that provided a perfect grip. "This is beautiful work," Jake admitted. Whoever made this knew what they were doing. "So, you admit defeat?" Kenthara called out from his seat. "The human cannot break everything after all." Jake ignored the insect and continued studying the sword. He looked at where the blade met the handle. He examined the pommel at the end of the grip. He tested the balance point. "The metal itself has no flaws," Jake said finally. "But that's not the only way something can be weak." He held the sword up so everyone could see it clearly. "This weapon was made for someone much larger than me. Look at the grip. It's designed for hands twice the size of mine. The balance point is wrong for my height and weight." Jake shifted his grip on the sword to demonstrate. For the being it was made for, this would be perfect. But for me, it's clumsy and hard to control. The weapon isn't weak, it's just wrong for the person using it. He handed the sword back to Vexthul. "That's another thing humans learn early. The best tool in the galaxy is useless if it doesn't fit the job you need to do." Vexthul took the sword back, looking thoughtful. "So you would not try to use this weapon?" "Not the way it is now," Jake said. "But I could modify it. Wrap the grip to make it smaller. Change the balance by adding weight to the pommel. Or I could break it down and use the metal to make something that fits me better." Students around the room were murmuring to each other. Jake caught words in several languages that seemed to translate to clever or unexpected. Zara stood up from her seat. "May I say something?" she asked. Vexthul nodded, though he looked curious about what the other human might add. Zara walked down to join Jake in the practice area. "You've all been thinking about this wrong," she said to the room. "You keep talking about human weaknesses, how we're slow and soft and don't have natural weapons." She gestured to Jake. "But you're missing the point. Those aren't just weaknesses. They're also our greatest strengths." "How can weakness be strength?" asked one of the rock creatures. Zara smiled. "Because when you can't rely on being the biggest or strongest or fastest, you learn to be smarter. When you don't have claws, you learn to make better tools. When you can't win by force alone, you learn to think your way out of problems." She pointed to different students around the room. "You," she said to Kenthara, "have natural armor and sharp claws. So when you fight, you probably rely on those gifts." Kenthara clicked his agreement. Of course. Why would Kenthara not use the gifts evolution gave him? "Because," Zara continued, "what happens when you meet someone whose armor is thicker than yours, or whose claws are sharper? You've spent your whole life relying on being tougher than your enemies. What do you do when you're not?" The insect went quiet, clearly thinking about this. Zara turned to the rock creatures. "And you probably win fights by being stronger than everyone else. But what happens when you meet something even stronger?" Jake picked up the conversation. "Humans can't win by being the toughest or strongest. So we learned to win by being unpredictable. We learned to turn our environment into weapons. We learned to find solutions that no one expects. Like breaking the unbreakable staff, said one of the snake-like students. Exactly, Jake nodded. You all saw a practice weapon. I saw raw materials that could be improved. Vexthul had been listening to all of this with growing interest. Now he spoke up. Show me more, he said. What do you mean? Jake asked. The instructor gestured around the room. Show me how humans would approach combat differently. Show me this adaptability you speak of. Jake looked around the practice area. There were weapons, training dummies, practice mats, and various pieces of equipment. To most beings, these were just the normal tools of a combat classroom. To Jake, they were a puzzle waiting to be solved. He walked over to a practice dummy made of some kind of tough synthetic material. It was designed to absorb impacts without breaking. Jake studied it for a moment, then pushed it over. Instead of standing back up like it was designed to do, Jake held it down. Most people would punch or kick this dummy, he said. But why fight it the way it was designed to be fought? He showed how the dummy could be used as a shield, or how its weighted base could be a weapon if you knew how to leverage it properly. He demonstrated how the practice mats could be used to tangle an opponent's feet, or how the weapon racks themselves could become barriers or clubs. Every environment is full of weapons if you know how to see them, Jake explained. A human warrior doesn't just bring weapons to a fight. They make new ones from whatever is around them. He picked up a simple wooden practice sword from a rack. This is meant to simulate a real blade. But what if I don't want to simulate? What if I want to do something completely different? Jake threw the wooden sword at a target across the room. It struck point first and stuck in the target's center. Now it's not a practice sword, he said. It's a throwing spear. The room was completely quiet as students absorbed what they were seeing. Jake could see minds working, trying to understand this different way of thinking about combat. Humans are persistence hunters, Zara added. We don't give up, ever. We keep coming back with new approaches until we find one that works. Vexthul was staring at both humans with an expression Jake had never seen before. It might have been respect. I have misjudged your species, the instructor said slowly. Physical strength is not the only measure of a warrior. Jake nodded. Every species has their own strengths. Yours is power and skill with traditional weapons. Ours is adaptability and creative problem-solving. But which is better? Asked Kenthara. Jake smiled. That depends on the situation. In a formal duel with standard weapons, you'd probably beat me. But in a real fight where anything goes and the environment matters, he shrugged. I'd like my chances. Vexthul was quiet for a long moment. Then he did something that shocked everyone in the room. He bowed to Jake. Not a deep bow, but a clear gesture of respect. I would like to learn more about this human approach to combat, he said. Perhaps we all have things to learn from each other. Word spread through the academy faster than Jake had thought possible. By dinner time that same day, students he had never met were pointing at him in the hallways. Some looked impressed, others seemed worried, and a few appeared scared. Jake sat in the dining hall with Zara, eating something that might have been meat but came from an animal he couldn't identify. The food was good, even if it was strange. Look around, Zara said quietly. Jake looked up from his meal. At tables throughout the huge dining hall, groups of alien students were having animated conversations. Many of them kept glancing over at Jake and Zara. What do you think they're talking about? Jake asked. Us, Zara replied. And what happened in class today? A shadow fell across their table. Jake looked up to see Kenthara standing there with his food tray. The insect's black eyes were focused on Jake. May Kenthara sit with the humans? He asked. Jake was surprised. This was the first time any non-human student had asked to join them for a meal. Sure, Jake said, gesturing to an empty chair. Kenthara sat down carefully, folding his 6 legs. Under him, for a moment no one spoke. Kenthara has been thinking about what happened today, the insect finally said. What about it? Zara asked. Kenthara's head tilted in that quick, jerky way it moved. Kenthara has always relied on natural weapons and armor. But what if the humans are right? What if that makes Kenthara limited? Jake set down his fork. It doesn't make you limited. It just means you have one set of tools. Humans have a different set. But your tools are better, Kenthara said. You can adapt to any situation. Jake shook his head. Our tools are different, not better. In a straight fight, your natural weapons and armor would probably beat anything I could improvise. But if I had time to prepare, to study the environment and plan, he shrugged, then maybe I'd have an advantage. Could you teach Kenthara this human way of thinking? The insect asked. Before Jake could answer, more students approached their table. Soon they had a mixed group, rock creatures, snake-like, beings, some of the tree people, and others Jake couldn't identify. We all heard what happened in Vexthal's class, said one of the rock creatures. Its voice sounded like gravel in a cement mixer. Is it true you broke the ironwood staff with your bare hands? I found its weak point and applied force correctly, Jake said. Anyone could have done it if they knew where to look. But how did you know where to look? Asked a snake being. That requires great knowledge. Jake thought about how to explain it. On Earth, humans have a saying, give a man a hammer and everything looks like a nail. It means that if you only know how to use one tool, you try to use that tool for everything. He gestured around the table. Most species here are like that. You have natural gifts, so you use those gifts for everything. But humans learn to see every problem as needing its own special solution. Show us, said the rock creature. Jake looked around the dining hall. Okay, see that serving line over there? Everyone turned to look at the long counter where students got their food. Alien cafeteria workers were serving meals to a steady line of students. Most of you probably see a normal food service area, Jake continued. But I see defensive positions, improvised weapons, and escape routes. He pointed to different parts of the serving area. Those metal serving trays? They're shields or clubs? The serving counter itself? Perfect barrier to hide behind. Those big pots the food comes in? Fill one with hot liquid and you have a weapon. That works on anyone, no matter how thick their armor is. The students stared at the serving line with new eyes. You see weapons everywhere, one of them said. It sounded worried. I see tools everywhere, Jake corrected. Whether they become weapons depends on the situation. The same tray that could be a shield might also be used to dig or to carry water, or to signal someone far away by reflecting light. Zara joined the conversation. It's not just about fighting. Humans adapt this way for everything. We look at problems and ask, what do I have available? How can I use it in a new way? What would happen if I combined this with that? Over the next hour, more students joined their table. Jake found himself explaining human thinking to a growing crowd. He talked about persistence hunting, where early humans would chase animals for days until the prey collapsed from exhaustion. He described how humans had learned to use fire, make tools, and eventually build machines. But the most important thing, Jake said, is that humans never give up. We keep trying new approaches until something works. One of the tree people spoke up. Its voice was deep and slow, like wind through leaves. This explains much about your species' rapid technological development. Jake nodded. We went from stone tools to spaceflight in just a few thousand years. Not because we're smarter than everyone else, but because we're stubborn. We keep experimenting and adapting. The conversation was interrupted when Instructor Vexthul entered the dining hall. The massive reptilian warrior looked around until he spotted Jake's table. Then he walked over, his claws clicking on the floor. All the students fell silent as he approached. Human Jake, Vexthul said formally. I have spoken with other instructors about today's class. Jake felt a moment of worry. Had he gotten in trouble for breaking academy property? We have decided, the instructor continued, to add a new section to the combat curriculum. It will be called Adaptive Combat Techniques. You will help teach it. Jake was so surprised he almost choked on his drink. You want me to teach? Yusya. And human Zara both, Vexthul confirmed. Students need to learn different approaches to combat. Your species has much to offer. The other students at the table made sounds of agreement in various languages. "I would be honored," Jake said. Vexthul nodded and started to walk away, then turned back. "Also, the Academy Workshop has prepared replacement parts for the staff you broke, but they have made them shorter as you demonstrated. The new design is more versatile." After the instructor left, the students at Jake's table burst into excited conversation. "You're going to be a teacher," said Kenthara. "Kenthara wants to be in your first class." "We all do," agreed the rock creature. Jake looked around at all the alien faces focused on him. A week ago, these same beings had looked at humans as weak and primitive. Now they were eager to learn from him. "There's one more thing you should understand about humans," Jake said to the group. "What's that?" asked Zara, curious what he was going to say. Jake smiled. "We're really good at making friends, even with people who are completely different from us." The students around the table made various sounds that Jake was learning to recognize as laughter in different species. Later that night, Jake and Zara walked back to their quarters through the Academy's halls. The building seemed less intimidating. Now, the high ceilings and wide corridors no longer made Jake feel small. "So," Zara said, "how does it feel to be famous?" Jake laughed. "Famous for breaking a stick in half. My mother would be so proud." "You did more than that," Zara said seriously. "You changed how they see us, how they see humans in general." Jake thought about that. Maybe. But I think what really happened is they learned something about themselves too. "What do you mean?" Jake stopped walking and looked around the hall. Alien students passed by, and several of them nodded respectfully as they went. "They learned that there's more than one way to be strong," he said. "More than one way to solve problems. More than one way to be a warrior." Zara smiled. "Think this will make things easier for other humans who come to the Academy?" Jake nodded. "I think so. They won't underestimate us anymore." As they reached their quarters, Zara paused at her door. "Jake? Yeah? What you did today, breaking that staff, did you know for sure it would work?" Jake was quiet for a moment, thinking about his answer. "No," he admitted finally. "I was pretty sure, but I wasn't certain. The engineering principles were sound, but you never know until you try." "So you were taking a risk," Jake smiled. "That's another thing humans are good at. We take calculated risks when we have to. And if it hadn't worked, if the staff hadn't broken," Jake shrugged, "then I would have looked foolish in front of everyone. But that was better than letting them think humans were weak without even trying to prove them wrong." Zara nodded. "That's very human of you." "Yeah," Jake agreed. "I guess it is." As he settled into his room that night, Jake thought about the day's events. He had come to the Academy to learn about alien combat techniques. Instead, he had ended up teaching aliens about human adaptability. His communicator beeped with a message from Earth. It was from his old drill sergeant. "Heard through the grapevine that you're making waves at that alien school," the message read. "Remember what I always told you. It's not about how big you are, it's about how big you fight. Sounds like you're fighting pretty big. Make us proud, soldier." Jake smiled and set the communicator aside. Outside his window, he could see alien stars in patterns that Earth's sky had never shown. Tomorrow he would start planning his first class as an instructor, teaching beings from across the galaxy about human persistence and adaptability. It was going to be interesting. But then, Jake thought as he drifted off to sleep, humans had always been good at making things interesting.